Welcome to the third video in our reading group series, Reading and Discussing Blackshirts and Reds by Michael Parenti. This time we will be continuing Chapter 1, Rational Fascism, with the second section of that chapter, Whom Did the Fascists Support?, followed by our group discussion, as normal. As with last time, I need to give you the disclaimer again that because our reading groups are open to the public and we encourage discussion of any ideas people bring to the table, this means some of the ideas expressed in our discussion may not reflect the actual views of our party on any level. We encourage everyone watching to think critically of any ideas expressed throughout this video. If you have a disagreement with anything that's said in our discussions throughout this video, and no one participating in the discussion brings it up to discuss as a group, please feel free to let us know in the comments so we can address it. Critically examining things is always the best way for all of us to learn and better understand the world, each other, and even ourselves. Now I'll hand it off to Daniel to kick things off.
Okay, so this is the next session. Any volunteers to read?
I could read if there's no one else that wants to.
Going once, going twice. Okay, please go ahead.
Whom did the fascists support? There is a vast literature on who supported the Nazis, but relatively little on whom the Nazis supported after they came to power. This is in keeping with the tendency of conventional scholarship to avoid the entire subject of capitalism whenever something unfavorable might be said about it. Whose interests did Mussolini and Hitler support? In both Italy in the 1920s and Germany in the 1930s, old industrial evils thought to have been passed permanently into history re-emerged as the conditions of labor deteriorated precipitously. In the name of saving society from the Red Menace, unions and strikes were outlawed. Union property and farm cooperatives were confiscated and handed over to rich private owners. Minimum wage laws, overtime pay, and factory safety regulations were abolished. Speed-ups became commonplace. Dismissals or imprisonment awaited those workers who complained about unsafe or inhumane work conditions. Workers toiled longer hours for less pay. The already modest wages were severely cut, in Germany by 25 to 40%, in Italy by 50%. In Italy, child labor was reintroduced. To be sure, a few crumbs were thrown to the populace. There were free concerts and sporting events, some meager social programs, a dole for the unemployed, financed mostly by contributions from working people, and showy public works projects designed to evoke civic pride. Both Mussolini and Hitler showed their gratitude to their big business patrons by privatizing many perfectly solvent state-owned steel mills, power plants, banks, and steamship companies. Both regimes dipped heavily into the public treasury to refloat or subsidize heavy industry. Agribusiness farming was expanded and heavily subsidized. Both states guaranteed a return on the capital invested by giant corporations, while assuming most of the risks and losses on investments. As is often the case with reactionary regimes, public capital was raided by private capital. At the same time, taxes were increased for the general populace, but lowered or eliminated for the rich and big business. Inheritance taxes on the wealthy were greatly reduced or abolished altogether. The result of all this? In Italy, during the 1930s, the economy was gripped by recession, a staggering public debt, and widespread corruption. But industrial profits rose, and the armaments factories busily rolled out weapons in preparation for the war to come. In Germany, unemployment was cut in half with the considerable expansion in armaments jobs, but overall poverty increased because of the drastic wage cuts. And from 1935 to 1943, industrial profits increased substantially, while the net income of corporate leaders climbed to 46%. During the radical 1930s, in the United States, Great Britain, and Scandinavia, upper income groups experienced a modest decline in their share of the national income. But in Germany, the top 5% enjoyed a 15% gain. Footnote 5, that's from Simon Kuznets, Qualitative Aspects of the Economic Growth of Nations, Economic Development and Cultural Heritage, 5, number 1, 1956, 5 through 94. Despite this record, most writers have ignored fascism's close collaboration with big business. Some even argue that business was not a beneficiary but a victim of fascism. Angelo Codavia, a Hoover Institute conservative scribe, blithely announced, "If fascism means anything, it means government ownership and control of business." Commentary, 894. Thus, fascism is misrepresented as a mutant form of socialism. In fact, if fascism means anything, it means all-out government support for business and severe repression of anti-business, pro-labor forces. Footnote 6. Ex-leftist and reborn conservative Eugene Genovese, New Republic 4195, eagerly leaped to the conclusion that it is a nonsensical interpretation to see fascism as a creature of big capital. Genovese was applauding Eric Hobsbawm, who argued that the capitalist class was not the primary force behind fascism in Spain. In response, Vicente Navarro, Monthly Review 196 and 496, noted that the major economic interests of Spain, assisted by at least one Texas oil millionaire and other elements of international capital, did indeed finance Franco's fascist invasion and coup against the Spanish Republic. A crucial source, Navarro writes, was the financial empire of Jean March, a founder of the Liberal Party and owner of a liberal newspaper. Considered a modernizer and an alternative to the oligarchic, land-based, reactionary sector of capital, March made common cause with the same oligarchs once he saw that working-class parties were gaining strength and his own economic interests were being affected by the reformist republic. Back to the text. Is fascism merely a dictatorial force in the service of capitalism? That may not be all it is, but that certainly is an important part of fascism's raison d'etre, the function Hitler himself kept referring to when he talked about saving the industrialists and bankers from Bolshevism. It is a subject that deserves far more attention than it is received. While the fascists might have believed they were saving the plutocrats from the Reds, in fact, the revolutionary left was never strong enough to take state power in either Italy or Germany. Popular forces, however, were strong enough to cut the profit rates and interfere with the capital accumulation process. This frustrated capitalism's attempts to resolve its internal contradictions by shifting more and more of its costs onto the backs of the working populace. Revolution, or no revolution, this democratic working-class resistance was troublesome to the moneyed interests. Along with serving the capitalists, fascist leaders served themselves, getting in on the money at every opportunity. Their personal greed and their class loyalties were two sides of the same coin. Mussolini and his cohorts lived lavishly, cavorting with the higher circles of wealth and aristocracy. Nazi officials and SS commanders amassed personal fortunes by plundering conquered territories and stealing from concentration camp inmates and other political victims. Huge amounts were made from secretly owned, well-connected businesses, and from contracting out camp slave labor to industrial firms like IG Farben and Krupp. Hitler is usually portrayed as an ideological fanatic, uninterested in crass material things. In fact, he accumulated an immense fortune, much of it in questionable ways. He expropriated artworks from the public domain. He stole enormous sums from Nazi party coffers. He invented a new concept, the, quote, personality right, that enabled him to charge a small fee for every postage stamp with his picture on it, a venture that made him hundreds of millions of marks. Footnote 7. There already was a stamp of von Hindenburg to honor his presidency. Old Hindenburg, who had no love for Hitler, sarcastically said he would make Hitler his postal minister because, quote, then he can lick my backside, end quote. Back to the text. The greatest source of Hitler's wealth was a secret slush fund to which leading German industrialists regularly donated. Hitler, quote, knew that as long as German industry was making money, his private money sources would be inexhaustible. Thus, he'd see to it that German industry was never better off than under his rule, by launching, for one thing, gigantic armament projects, end quote. And that's from Wolf Schwarzweiler, The Unknown Hitler, Bethesda, Maryland, The National Press Books, 1989, page 197. Or what we today would call fat defense contracts. Far from being the ascetic, Hitler lived self-indulgently. During his entire tenure in office, he got special rulings from the German tax office that allowed him to avoid paying income or property taxes. He had a motor pool of limousines, private apartments, country homes, a vast staff of servants, and a majestic estate in the Alps. His happiest times were spent entertaining European royalty, including the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, who numbered among his enthusiastic admirers.
Okay, thank you very much. Question for this section. What role does the funding of civic works projects and free programs, such as sporting events and concerts, play in the fascist program?
Bread and circus, just to appease the masses, keep them from getting out the pitchforks.
Allows you to plausibly claim the mantle of some savior or great patron of the everyday man when you're not really.
Yeah, I think that part is very central to any lingering sentiment that, oh, maybe fascism isn't that bad. Because look, the trains run on time and we have new roads and there were football matches every other day. European football, I mean. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to add?
There's another book I'm reading that's going into depth about like a lot of those things, the strength through joy and the trips and whatever, and like going into much more detail about like how they weren't what they seemed. That like oftentimes like the hotels and whatever that they lodge these people in, these owners would just basically like stick them in closets practically, while still, letting the rich people, have the nice rooms and all that.
Yeah. I mean, just that description of Hitler's, enormous wealth and access to all this, all these luxuries throughout the 1930s is like very familiar to us today.
Sounds like the kind of guy that would take $1 as a salary.
Yeah. And then not tip. All right. So the answer I came up with was fascist economic policies immiserate the working class and peasantry, but by providing a handful of free programs and events and building up civil infrastructure, the masses can still believe that things aren't getting all bad. In other words, minor investments in bread and circuses help obscure and distract from the more direct ways in which the working class is materially worse off under fascism, and help garner mass support from fascist regimes. All right. Next question for this section. In what ways does Parenti show that fascists support capitalists over the toiling masses?
I mean, all the cutting of workers' rights and making sure that all the workers that like tried to speak out against terrible conditions in their workplace were arrested.
Yeah, for sure. Disproportional response aimed at the left in terms of like state violence for violations of the law.
Mm-hmm.
There was also that line in there of wage cuts for the workers, tax cuts for the business owners,
Mm-hmm.
The answer I came up with was Parenti offers some statistics in Italy and Germany of how the working class was overall worse and the capitalist class was overall better off under fascism. In Italy, the masses were harmed by recession, an explosion of public debt, and rampant corruption in the new fascist government, while profits overall were up. In Germany, even though unemployment was halved due to an explosion of jobs in the armament industries, wages were suppressed so much that average income went down, all while industrial profits grew and personal income for industrial leaders went up 46%. In both Italy and Germany, fascist leaders cavorted more with the wealthy and big business leaders, even using their political position to accrue personal fortunes. Next question. If individual capitalist firms or small businesses do not survive fascism or are harmed by fascist economic policies, why does this not invalidate the argument that capitalism benefits from fascism and that capitalists support fascists?
Because we're not children.
Yeah. Also, like, they aren't too concerned with small businesses per se. They're concerned with their large corporate donors that they are getting all this support from.
I heard this one guy named Goldstein lost his business to the Nazis, so therefore,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Overall, the largest of the bourgeoisie benefited greatly from this, and if some smaller or maybe one or two scapegoated businesses or firms got caught in the process, it's most likely because it was beneficial to the largest bourgeoisie.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you think about it systemically, fascism is about ensuring the survival of the capitalist mode of production.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about making sure that every single capitalist gets unicorns and rainbows and ice cream on demand. It's not about granting all the wishes of all the capitalists. It's about making sure the system as a whole survives the crisis.
Yeah.
And it's also funny because, like, yeah, man, that's just what happens under capitalism. Like, sometimes businesses go bust. Sometimes, you lose everything, but no one ever tries to argue that, capitalism is bad for capitalists or anything,
Yeah, this question kind of reads like the person being like, well, I know of this one guy who in a universal healthcare system, he had to wait too long to get in and he died, so therefore we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, this was definitely me trying to play devil's advocate. Like, and I do that sometimes just because,
Oh no, for
we
sure.
we
I
need to be
obviously.
prepared to answer these questions, even if you take 5 seconds to think about them, they're pretty ridiculous questions, but
I like
still.
the way you captured our opponent's intelligence level exactly in this, question.
Yeah. All right. I'm sure we've already mentioned most of this. Fascism's purpose is to defeat any popular resistance to capitalism and to ensure that the capitalist system as a whole survives whatever crisis precipitated the turn to fascism. In order to achieve these goals, it is not necessary that all capitalists benefit or that all businesses thrive. Even in liberal bourgeois democracies, capitalists and their businesses lose money or go out of business. But this does not mean liberal bourgeois democracy does not support capitalism as a system.
Thanks for tuning into this video, and thanks to everyone that attended our reading group live. We hope you got something out of this. If you enjoyed this video and want to attend a reading group live yourself, feel free to reach out to us via email at milwaukee@cpusa.org, DM us on any of our social media, or just come say hi to us at an event we're at. See you in the next video covering the third section of Chapter 1, Kudos for Adolf and Benito.